Dishonorable Mention is brought to you by 813area.com. 813area.com is the place to go to see where to go and what to do in all of Hillsborough County. Whether it's the best events, the newest restaurants, or where to be in Tampa Bay, 813 Area is your resource for everything happening around town. For the latest on where to be in 813, check out 813area.com. Dishonorable Mention is now on social media. Follow us on Facebook, and we're at Dishonorable Pod on Twitter too. Next week, we'll start taking questions from Twitter because y'all have been an amazing part of this. Thank you.
All right, welcome to another episode of Dishonorable Mention. I'm Ernest Hooper, columnist for the Tampa Bay Times. Joining us this morning, State Representative Chris Latvala, community activist Becca Teeter, and our very special guest, State Representative Jennifer Webb. Good morning, everyone. How are you guys?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Jennifer, we're so excited to have you here. We want to spend a couple of minutes just letting our listeners know a little bit more about you. You are a Gulfport resident. Tell us a little bit about being a freshman legislator and representing your district.
All right. So my district, I have 11 cities in my district. Nobody has more cities, no other legislator. I go from Fort DeSoto all the way up to North Reddington and all the way into Pinellas Park, Lillman, and Kenneth City. And you know it's going to be hard when you get elected as a freshman representative, a freshman Democrat in particular. But until you experience it, it's a whole different story. However, that being said, you set your expectations right and you just go in for, small victories and making sure that you're working well with your own caucus and across the aisle to push forward your community's agenda. And it's been pretty successful so far this session.
That's terrific. Representative Latvala, what kind of counsel have you lent Jennifer in her first year?
Well, the first thing is if she ever has any questions on how to vote or other things, would be to come and ask me for advice. Which she has, but
is that why you're friendly with so many Democrats? You're like the secret mole to try and sway the voters.
I try to mentor the freshmen, especially the freshman Democrats,
corrupt them early,
and try to set them on a path for success. And then I do think that Representative Webb, in her short time in Tallahassee, has done a very good job at being effective, because you can be effective, even being a Democrat in Tallahassee, and she's done that.
That's not even an ironic statement. Even being a Democrat, that is a true and accurate statement.
Well, just being in the minority party, and even as a Republican, as a freshman, it's not the easiest thing to be effective, and get bills passed and get things in the budget and so on. But Jennifer's done a very good job.
Thanks, Chris.
Hey, what went into the decision to run, Jennifer? What led you to first run for office in 2016 and then to come back and try again in 2018?
So in 2016, I was at the university at the time, and I was trying to I was actively encouraging faculty to get involved in their community, because what faculty members tend to do and people at universities is they talk about the community like it's out there instead of as if they're part of a community. And then they say, oh, they need to be doing this and they need to be doing that. And I'm like, get involved. You're part of that community and make sure that you're making the changes that you want to see. Run for office, serve on board, all of the different ways to be civically engaged. I was giving talks at the university to faculty members and to community partners about. And finally, one of a handful of people that I very much respected surrounded me, and they said, the seat that you live in is very competitive and you should run for that. And so I started paying attention, and I looked at the votes that my predecessor, Rep, now Commissioner Peters, took, and I thought, I wouldn't have voted that way, and I don't think my community would have wanted her or their elected official to vote that way. And so I ran on the issues, and luckily, I ran a clean race and ran it just about issues, so that when I wasn't successful in 2016 and decided to run again in 2018, I had her respect because I didn't attack her personally. I just said, here are a few votes that I would have done differently, and here's what I would have brought that she wasn't able to bring. And in 2016, it wasn't enough of a differentiation, but in 2018, I just stayed engaged and people wanted to vote for me. They knew that I would be a good representative, that I would continue to reach back out to the community and find out what they wanted, what they wanted for their community and bring their voice and values up to Tallahassee.
How much courage does it take to put yourself out there? And I'll put that out there to you and Chris.
Yeah, our districts are very similar. They're both very competitive for both parties. And so, and I think that's why we're both pretty middle of the road, in a lot of areas, because in a district like mine, if you're ultra conservative, you're not going to be elected for very long. Just like in hers, if she was ultra liberal like Becca, her time in
it's called well read, Chris. There's a difference.
Not be a long one, but it is pretty nerve wracking putting your name out before people and facing possible public rejection. Is not a fun thing, but for the most part, public service has been very rewarding and very much worth it.
Well, and I think that unless you're familiar with politics, you don't know that it takes courage. I mean, there's a lot of naivete that goes into running. You think, oh, this isn't going to be so bad. And then the attack ads start and you're like, oh, wow, well, that's okay. It takes a lot of, I think it was more naivete than courage. Although people say that I'm courageous all the time. I'm like, no, I just didn't think that it was going to go that bad. I'm an optimist. And then I'm surprised and then I adjust, and I'm already in. So let's just make the best of it. And in talking to other elected officials, there's a lot of that. They just, did the right thing and didn't over focus on the parts that would be hard. And so it was easy to jump in. It's kind of like having kids, right? Like if you just look at how much money it takes and how much time and resources and everything, you might never, choose to actually have children. You just do it with a kind of faith. That's why I think the older you get, the less likely you are to have kids.
Now, Becca, you have pondered running for office and may yet run for office. What are your thoughts about stepping into the political arena?
Nothing about running scares me. It's just I do a lot of work to try and make the world a better place. Is that the best use of making the world a better place? And I think there's an argument that it could be because, going one by one, campus by campus, community by community, person by person is much slower process than saying, I can create something that affects everyone. So that's what's so attractive about it to me. And that's the only thing that would make it worth giving up time with my family.
Is there an issue in Clearwater that might draw you to running for the Clearwater City Council, such as, I don't know, a proposed amphitheater at the Reimagine downtown Clearwater?
You should call it Reimagine because known as Imagine Clearwater, as it was voted on by my fellow citizens and taxpayers and Chris's, since we live in the same city, it's bananas to me. It's bananas to me and so insulting that, first of all, you have this delegation that sits there and says, let's do something really great. Let's next level our city like St. Pete has done and like Tampa has done and many other places have done with this magnificent piece of waterfront. And let's really ask people what they want. So far, this is tracking as a good choice. Then what happens is they do all that. They get that feedback. Experts come in and say, this will work. Then they go, but this one guy thinks that we should really do it different. So we'll ask another consultant, keep writing checks. And these is for people who allege to be fiscally conservative. Anyways, so they keep writing checks and the consultant says, 4,000 seats is too much and you shouldn't fence it off. People want an open space. And they're like, but really, even though that's your expertise and we've employed you to do that, I think we're going to vote completely a different way. So when you absolutely trash taxpayer dollars, completely disregard what your community has said, you go against what you originally presented to the public. Yeah, I think you have a flawed delegation. And since they all voted for it, the only one who really gave any pushback was the mayor, and Hoyt Hamilton gave some. The rest of them are culpable and should be held accountable for their actions. Unfortunately, 2 of those seats are up for office in 2 years.
And again, we're talking about the Clearwater City Council voting for a 4,000 seat covered amphitheater at what will be a reinvigorated Coachman Park, where we've gone for years to see concerts. I've gone to the Clearwater Jazz Holiday several times. It was not covered. I had a blast. I don't necessarily know if it needs to be covered. And it seems like such an expensive project, the price tag on that. And I think there were some folks at Ruth Eckerd Hall who argued you're not going to be able to get good acts, good entertainers, good musicians without a cover.
And I say, take a little peek at downtown St. Petersburg, which uses their green space beautifully weekend after weekend. And last time I checked, they're not having a problem with attendance. People want to go to festivals. They want to go to events. They want to go to things where they can meander and connect in the community. They don't want to necessarily go through gates to enter everything. And now you're basically creating an outdoor Ruth Eckerd Hall. And don't get me wrong, Ruth Eckerd is an absolute gem in our community. And I love that I can see such incredible talent walking distance from my home. But it's strong enough on its own, and we have other venues. They've gone the wrong direction, and more importantly, they've completely disregarded what voters asked them to do.
Chris, I understand you're seeking some state dollars to help support the 4,000 seat covered amphitheater. Is that true?
Well, I do have an appropriation request for Ruth Eckerd Hall. I have the attitude that, if there's an organization in my district that needs state dollars, I will gladly put in the request. I think this year I had, I believe, $42 million in appropriations requests. Only a fraction of those made it through the initial process. And to just give you an idea, with the 120 members that we have in the legislature or in the Florida House, I was, I think, like 22nd in terms of the highest in the number of dollars that I asked for. And so, I'm one of those Republicans that tries to bring home the bacon to my district. But as for the Ruth Eckerd Hall request, I believe that was for their home.
Not for the amphitheater.
Correct. It was for their renovations that they're doing to the actual Ruth Eckerd Hall on McMullen Booth.
Okay.
And that I wholly support. Again, I think it's a treasure, and I think we're very fortunate. I do also think another thing the city of Clearwater is screwing up is we could really do some great development. I drive by, that stretch of land between McMullen Booth and 19 on Drew Street and Gulf to Bay, and there's even cut-throughs. We could develop affordable housing in there. There's already green space. We've got Baycare anchored there. We could put cool restaurants. You could do like street festivals and that breakaway through. There's so much that could be done in Clearwater, and we keep focusing on 4 blocks in downtown Clearwater, which most people don't want to go to.
Who owns the majority of those blocks in downtown Clearwater?
Well, Scientology owns a lot, but they keep focusing on the ones they've held on to. And I think they're beating a dead horse. I believe Scientology is a valid and an important part of the Clearwater community, and to ignore it or to treat it as if it's second dan is wrong. They live here. They contribute to our community, and to push them aside is.
Yeah, Leah Remini does not agree with you.
I'm not encouraging people to join the church. What I'm saying is that they're absolutely good corporate citizens.
And there are parts that Leah Remini did a couple episodes on the city of Clearwater, and those I do not believe were very accurate.
Well, that's because you're in love with the police department.
Yeah, but I've never seen the police do. I mean, there's off-duty police officers at many community events, and
again, the city of Clearwater Police Department is strong.
Organizations, and so, I think in Clearwater there's just been a lack of direction from the top, and people can use the excuse of we don't have a strong mayor form of government like St. Pete does, But, even if you are the mayor, you can do more than take pictures, go cut ribbons. For years, the current mayor really wasn't out front in a lot of issues. The first, issue that he really was out in front on was the referendum last year to have a strong mayor form of government that he was against. And so, it just, we don't have to have a strong mayor form of government to have a leader that says, this is the direction that we're going to go in. And I've heard the current mayor give speeches that where he'll joke and say, well, it took 8 mayors to get the, Riverwalk in Tampa finished, or to get such and such finished, which, that's just a cop out. There's a time where you can say, all right, there's enough studies being taken place. The old Harborview Center was a big time failure. Let's move on. Let's do something else along the waterway there. And, because that's a pristine area, and people will, flock there if given, a reason to. And I think that, people use the Church of Scientology as a cop out. Yeah, they're a major landowner in downtown Clearwater. When I have interactions with them, I treat them no differently than I do any other, constituent or any other group. And I think that's kind of the way that you should deal with them.
Yeah. Before moving on to the next topic, I will say, you look at the downtowns in Tampa Bay, Clearwater really is kind of the last.
I'm
Right.
coming in for the defense.
The last district that has
And
not
even
fulfilled its
Dunedin
potential.
has
I'm
better
gonna
than us.
because what you can't see is all of the work that he's done under the surface to make sure that y'all have really good infrastructure so that you can support and sustain development in the future. And that's something that none of our other cities have done to the extent that he's done. And so he has led. So I'm defending. So he has led
what
on that.
has he led on?
Well, no, I mean, every Big C meeting.
And he's a friend of mine, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, but
he's not
really-
exactly a strong.
No, but he
willed
has
politician.
made sure that he's led in terms of administration and making sure that the revenue is going to the right places.
When
And so,
when they wanted to move City Hall temporarily, he pitched a fit. And
don't
because
know
the current City Hall needs to be renovated, needs to be moved. I mean, I think they could sell that for $1 gazillion and move
Mhm.
City Hall somewhere where it's not on the water.
water. Yeah.
I just think I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. That may be his strength, what Jennifer's talking about, but we have in Chris's district, stone's throw from my house, a medical school opening, and we have all these apartment complexes that are in various states of disarray that we should have worked actively with developers to make them livable for medical students. So we have quality, affordable housing, so they're more likely to reside in Pinellas County, both short and long term. But if I pulled up to that medical school as a student, I'd turn right and look at what we have right available in Pinellas. I'd turn left and see what we have available in Hillsborough. And I'm writing my rent check to Hillsborough County. And I'm going to do business over there. We have much better options right in that area. And it's a huge misstep on behalf of Clearwater.
And as Becca knows, and I don't want to steal her thunder, but there are large sections of Clearwater that have been ignored for years.
Sure.
Amen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and Chris and I talk about this a lot. We have this super rich, diverse Hispanic population that doesn't get the we should have the best in our region Hispanic festival every year.
So honestly, our region, Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, Pasco, we could do a much better job on heritage and cultural tourism. That is such missed opportunity. And people who go to a place for heritage and cultural tourism stay and spend money in the community in a way that resort goers don't, in a way that convention goers don't. It's such a missed opportunity, and it doesn't matter what side of the bay you're on.
There is a Hispanic festival at Coachman Park that one of the radio stations puts on. And I've been there a couple times, and it's very attended. It's one of the most popular Hispanic radio stations.
Yeah, but tying that to then Ybor City and the history there and the Tampa Latins, and then tying that back to
in my district, that's part Clearwater, part Largo. My largest minority is Hispanics by far.
I just think it would be really cool, like when you went into Tampa Airport, which I spend a lot of time in, or Clearwater St. Petersburg Airport, or the Chambers of Commerce. Like, we literally have people from every Latin nation, and they have restaurants and bakeries, and we can have real, I mean, Gulf to Bay is a culinary tour, and you could, and we just we don't appreciate it. We don't leverage it, and we don't use it smartly and celebrate that culture.
and we tear it down and build up like new buildings that make Tampa and other places indistinguishable from cities all over the United States.
Becca, as far as you can tell, what has a Hispanic never done in the city of Clearwater?
Well, there is very little. I spoke to a high-ranking official with a long time history with the city of Clearwater, and they have no knowledge of a Hispanic member serving on the Clearwater City Council. I've had one person refute that, but my source was really good. We have a remarkable history of older white men serving on Clearwater City Council. And I'm not saying there's not a place for older white men. My father's one of them, and I think he brings a lot to the table. But the fact that we've had no Hispanic representation, almost no female representation, no one outwardly LGBTQ. I believe there's been one Jewish person in the history of Clearwater that anyone can remember, and I think it was for like a 2-year term in the 70s. And there's just no people of color. And so a city without diversity lacks vision, and you see it on the streets of Clearwater.
And cultural and heritage tourism and drawing attention to diversity within the Tampa Bay area is a great way of identifying who is valued in community and who the community is. Because
And we do hope that older white women or older white men listen to our podcast, especially after we get our sponsorship from Dollar General.
Yes.
that'll be the clincher.
We pour a little out for you, Dollar General. But I think the takeaway is we have, in this wonderful area that we live in, we have big cities like Tampa and St. Petersburg. And again, Clearwater is the third largest city. And then we have Safety Harbor and Gulfport and Dunedin, and these wonderful cities that have such a soul about them. And we should just take a cue from their playbooks.
Do y'all know who, in my district, what the largest minority population is? Vietnamese Americans.
Very,
That's cool.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
mean,
not
and
have guessed that.
Exactly.
There's
because
I learned this a couple of years ago. In my district, there's a large Russian population.
Oh, yeah. I believe that. Well, and so all of these things that we
Has it gone up since 2018? I mean, 2016. 2016. I apologize. Oh, that was. I'm just
Well,
kidding.
that's a nice transition
No collusion.
Okay.
to something else I'd like to talk about. This week we had the president make an erroneous statement about wind turbines and
cause cancer.
yes, which upset a lot of people on both sides of the aisle. But I thought what was really interesting was the response offered by Senator Marco Rubio, who suggested that, well, this is just the kind of thing our unorthodox president says, and people like the fact that he's unorthodox, and we just have to get used
Are
to
you
him.
using the word unorthodox for?
I'm using the word Marco Rubio used, unorthodox. And to me, he was trying to normalize these kinds of statements that the president makes instead of standing up and saying, oh my gosh, this was crazy, and he shouldn't have said it. And we really need Republicans to challenge the president, when he goes off the ranch with these kinds of statements. And I was disappointed in Senator Rubio trying to normalize, in my opinion, the kind of statements that need to be challenged from the president. Your thoughts?
Did the president provide any did he say where he got that information from? Or was it just something that he, saw in Alex Jones and
Oh,
decided
please
to,
don't ever mutter that name again.
Yeah,
on
I'm
this
not.
podcast.
I'm not sure
decided
what.
to repeat?
I'm not sure what the source was, but
Does he ever cite his sources?
Yeah, and it's just an example of the kind of statements he
But he
makes
doesn't
on a
need
fairly
sources
regular
because
basis.
he's smart and he went
The
to a great
smartest.
He's the
school.
smartest president ever.
I found it ironic a week or two ago when he was getting in a tiff with Adam Schiff, and I think he even said, if you lie, you should, you don't deserve to be in office. Talking about Adam Schiff.
The president said that?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And
Okay, sir, we accept your proposal. We'll
Challenge accepted.
Yeah. You know what I think is really interesting? When we look at our political parties, I feel like, and I'm going to go after both of them right now, I feel like Republicans will excuse anything if it meets their agenda. And I feel like Democrats will eat their own if it makes them feel politically pure. And I feel like we're both making some mistakes in that area that we are so quick. I'm not excusing the laundry list of things that the person who currently holds the office of president has done. But I also think that, we are it's just such an interesting, when you look at it sociologically, the way we approach those as parties is fascinating to me.
Well, do you think that if the Democrats were in control of the White House, that it would then shift, that the Republicans, because you're talking about the activists, right? The activists will excuse anything and the activists will eat their own if they're not ideologically pure on the other side. If the table was turned, do you think that we would see the same thing?
And Democrats excused other, Democratic presidents' behavior. Take Bill Clinton, for instance.
Okay. You've
Or
just
take-
gone back to the 90s. Do something
Okay,
current.
have you
Make
been
it
to
relevant.
the state of Virginia?
Okay, we've already done this conversation.
No, but there are other examples of that where, like, each party excuses the behavior of their own members when it's to their benefit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
In some
I
cases,
don't agree.
but in some cases, the Democrats haven't. What immediately comes to mind is Senator Al Franken from Minnesota.
And I still don't know why he resigned. Other than they made
he was
him.
chased. Yeah, he was chased out of Washington by Democratic leadership. We've seen in almost every instance with someone announcing that they're going to run for president, days, if not hours after that announcement, it's some kind of negative story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she's not black enough, and she was mean to her staff, and he makes women feel creepy, and
But you know who's politically pure? My boy Mayor Pete. Holding strong. I love you, man.
He raised $7 million.
And I am a contributor. But I've contributed
Like
to everyone.
500 G's or
Yeah, right. I've contributed to every woman running for president and Mayor Pete. So, but yeah, no, I mean,
I like that approach because you're not making a snap judgment and taking a kernel of information and using that to determine whether the person's a good candidate or not. And I think we're seeing too much of that right now instead of trusting the process, as Joel Embiid would say, and let this play out.
Does anybody have, I don't know, Chris, just pretend that you are supporting a Democrat in this scenario, or if you had to, does anyone have a favorite declared candidate?
I have least favorites.
Okay.
Like,
shocking. Carry
Elizabeth Warren would be one of my least favorites.
Yeah, she thinks a lot. That might make you nervous. Go ahead.
No, I mean, with Beto. Like, I
Okay,
have
I'm
no
with you
use
on
for
that.
Beto.
I think.
I mean, he's
Really?
about as shallow as they come.
Are you sure?
I don't love him. He doesn't.
I like Mayor Pete's authenticity. And the fact that he speaks, 8 languages or 4 languages.
He speaks 7
Rhodes
languages.
Scholar.
Veteran.
Right.
I mean, from the Midwest, I have yet to find anything about him, including his husband and his dogs, that I don't love.
I still think Kamala Harris, if I had to bet money now, I would say she wins the primary.
Really?
Yeah.
I think she's pretty incredible. I mean, I think those are probably my 2 favorite. I like Elizabeth Warren, and I'm not disrespecting America, but she's too intellectual and her approach to be elected president. That's not what we want.
Are we dismissing Joe Biden because of the
He's not declared,
allegations that
though.
have come out?
He's
No,
not
he hasn't
declared.
You're
So-
I
correct.
just think that they will, and Joe Biden would probably be the strongest candidate against Trump, especially if he had a running mate like Kamala Harris or, somebody younger, and he says,
Or Stacey Abrams, which they bought the website in the fall. Biden Abrams was purchased in November.
Yeah, I mean, why would she run? Because she lost her last race, so it makes her
Because of Republican gerrymandering, she lost her last race, and she almost won
How can you gerrymander a statewide election, Becca?
because you set it up for failure. And there was a lot of accusations that are considered credible for voter fraud. But she is like, people are loving her. Like she sets people's soul on fire. And I think that the fact that a African-American woman almost won the state of Georgia, I think that's a compelling statement.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like President Trump, I'm a little in line with Chris. I like winners. I mean, at the end of the day, she lost.
Right.
She lost.
Oh.
I'm sorry. She lost. It's part of my sports mentality. At the end of the day, it's about what's on the scoreboard. And you can make it. You can make excuses. You can talk about things that went awry. And her candidate was also the guy who oversaw the election. I understand all the arguments about what happened in Georgia, but at the end of the day, she lost. And do you think someone who couldn't win Georgia should be a party's choice to win it all in the entire United States?
If the top of the ticket is an old white guy, yeah. I mean, and
but,
I
but
love
why not
Joe
Kamala
Biden.
Harris?
Well, no, absolutely.
Who's a winner?
Right.
And I like Joe Biden, but if you look at the Democratic candidates who've gotten elected, they've all been young. And I'm talking from Carter forward. Democrats want young people who set them on fire.
Like
and if you
Chuck
can't
Schumer
do that,
and Nancy Pelosi.
I'm
nationally.
talking about presidents.
Oh, I got you.
And so and that's why I think that Beto could be a contender, honestly. And
He lost, too.
Mayor Pete could be a contender. Yeah, but he has that spark that President Obama had, that Democrats have to feel in order to actually show up at the polls. And it's a problem in our party.
And I will tell you one thing that my father said, who is always my source of things that are intelligent. Abraham Lincoln lost his last election before he was elected president. And actually, Beto has as much legislative experience as Abraham Lincoln did when he went into office.
Time.
Of course, it was a different time.
There
But
would
there's
be no way
there's a
that
historical
Abraham Lincoln would be able to be president today. He lost
because he cares about equality and freedom.
He lost 7 elections, and so he never would have been able to rise to that level. And I love Abraham Lincoln, but you can't lose nowadays. You couldn't lose 7 elections and then become president.
Well, let's
That's
look
just not possible. And
All right. So,
in terms of legislative experience, though, I mean, President Obama didn't have a ton of legislative experience. He had one term as a congressman.
one term as a senator.
As a
U.S.
senator.
senator.
We all look at
He was a
Ernest
state
as our-
senator for a while.
Yeah, I don't know. I think
Where are we with Vice President Biden? Do you think these allegations are
He
undermining
would
him?
be
Becca,
the-
you've actually met Vice President Biden.
I have
What do you
too.
think?
Did he sniff your hair?
First of all, I'd like to be clear that if he had, I would have been all in for it. But that's so there'd be no problem here. I'm not diminishing anyone else's experience. I'm just telling you that I would not find that problematic. It's really hard for me because I know too many people that have worked closely with him that hold him in such high regard as a person of character. And these are true. I mean, these are people who worked with him at the highest level in the White House, that have worked with him in his foundation. And these are people that in violence prevention, that I respect beyond measure. But I will never discount how somebody feels. So it's difficult. Do I think this disqualifies him as a candidate? I do not. Do I think this damages his image? I do. Do I think that those are mutually exclusive? No. And again, we have elected people who have done far worse. My problem is that and this is his weakness, I think, if you're going to analyze him as a candidate, is his aw shuck stuff, which Chris does really well too, can be very charming. However, what he doesn't do well is sometimes he says things, and while it may be well intended, it makes absolutely no sense, or it is so in the wrong direction. And he's made several statements since this happened. Like he opened up an event the other night making a joke about consent. That's a bad call. You should probably get another advisor there. Do I think that a bad joke eliminates the decades of work he's done in violence prevention? No, because I'm not a moron. But I do think that you have to look at somebody and say, are they making good choices? You have to be sharp and savvy. And there's definitely some choices that he's making that are not sharp nor savvy.
Smart, sharp, savvy, and nimble. And we're not seeing him be nimble enough and trying to communicate that he's evolving from this, learning from this, and trying to adapt his behavior
Y'all
for
think
a
it's a
new era.
generational thing? Because I believe that Joe Biden is a good man.
Yes.
I don't think
do
that
too.
I don't think he's ever assaulted anybody. I think that if he has done something, it was, something that he thought was harmless that somebody else may have
He is
thought
as
was creepy. But I think that it also might be a generational thing.
He is as touchy and feely towards men as he is towards women. And I think you're right in terms of the generational thing or the cultural thing. It's like these days you ask before you give people hugs. And I have been in this, honestly, I went to give somebody a hug the other day without being like, oh, can I give you a hug? And the person froze up. And it was a colleague of ours. And I thought, oh, I'm never actually going to do that again. But it was like a series of hugs down the road. And then this one person was clearly uncomfortable. And I thought, this is how that happens.
For sure.
Yeah, it's generational and it's also cultural. And I think here, particularly in Tampa, with his Latin and Hispanic roots, it's much more common to give people hugs, kiss people on the cheek. There are a lot of women that I routinely greet with a kiss on the cheek, and I've
Would
seen,
Deneen be one of those women when you see her? Or would she
well,
not
I
be on
haven't
the...
I haven't seen Deneen since November of 1984, so I don't know if I would
More clues to the puzzle,
kiss her
Becca. More clues to the puzzle.
on the cheek. Maybe I would, but it's really, really interesting. And I think what people want to do to resolve this is take a vote. So we asked 10 women and 8 said it's fine. It doesn't work that way. You still got to respect the 2 who said, no, man, I wasn't comfortable with that. We're evolving as a society, and we need people to reflect an understanding of that evolution, to reflect an understanding of the Me Too movement and its impact, and adjust their behavior and express some understanding. The Vice President Biden has done that to a certain degree, but then he comes back with the joke, and then you're kind of like, well, I'm not sure he gets it.
And everyone keeps, in my progressive circles, people keep talking about, well, he was terrible to Anita Hill. That is a true statement. But he's also done remarkable things since then, has publicly apologized, which should carry more water. He helped authorize and author the Violence Against Women Act. He helped address sexual violence on college campuses, which I've been doing for 15 years, a mainstream conversation. We are not going to find a perfect candidate. I'm sitting here with 2 elected officials that I think should be in office that are remarkable leaders, except for Chris's bad votes on education, but that serve Florida well. But I am sure there is somebody who would say something about them that would send people all aflutter, and that should not destroy the good that they do.
Now, I couldn't agree with you more. Now, I do wish we could say something about Randy Fine and then it's Baxley that could derail their
Back to
careers.
back to Biden though, and I know Ernest has a lot of interesting conspiracy theories,
I do.
and some of which have been proven right. And I wasn't the person that thought of this, but I saw it the other day. That have y'all realized that there has been one person that really has not defended him in the last couple of weeks, that or at least that I've seen, and that was President Obama. And so what the person was theorizing is that Obama is just kind of letting him, waffle in the wind, so to speak, and then Michelle would make a late entrance into the race.
My only argument against that, although you just set Ernest's heart on fire, is that President Obama just did. He did an article or an interview where he talked about how Democrats' current desire for political purity is going to be the downfall of the next election cycle.
Right. Well, and I also think they're going to take Trump lightly, and like they did in 2016, and just like they took Ron DeSantis lightly last year.
Yeah, they shouldn't. They absolutely should not, and I can't believe they will. But we talked about this in the last episode. It's a matter of pragmatism versus principle. And right now, we have some people in the Democratic Party who are leaning too much on principle, and they're not being dearly pragmatic enough. All right, so back to your colleagues who,
You didn't go to Vegas with them?
The newspaper
I did not.
is already struggling, and these two guys want to pass a bill that would free municipalities from having to place legal notices in newspapers. Like, hey, man, my daughter's 17. I got to hold on until I get her through college. Can you let them know that the newspaper needs this? Can you talk to them? Can you talk to the people of Ocala?
And
This guy, Dennis, am I saying his name right? Baxley?
yeah.
His name is on practically every bill that I despise in Tallahassee.
And he's a really nice man, and he puts forward really bad legislation.
Really bad.
And my opinion has changed somewhat on this bill by being friends with Ernest. And I think that public notices, just having them in a newspaper is a revenue stream for newspapers. I think that is very obvious, and it's one of their biggest revenue streams is having these public notices.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about it because I clearly have a vested interest.
But there are some places, like especially in South Florida, where they have 20 publications, in Miami or in some of those other large cities. And so if you just put a public notice in one, does that satisfy putting them in all of them? And especially now with things on the internet, is there just can you put it on the internet or whatnot? I think that whoever creates the best widget should succeed, in business. But there is a place, even though the Times, ticks me off on a regular basis about something. There is.
Oh yeah, wasn't there an editorial this week written about they don't like your bill?
No, I mean, but they don't like a lot of my bills, so that's fine. But I mean, there is a place for if the Tampa Bay Times folded next week, that would be no, and I hope they don't. But that would not be good for our city or our state, because journalism, keeps corrupt politicians in check, and also just corruption, and whether it's business or some of the big things that they've just uncovered in the past year.
Yeah, I want to get back to the public notice, because just because somebody makes money doing a service doesn't mean that service is contemptible. I mean, honestly,
but that bill, that's a decades long thing, and back when that was written, we didn't have the internet. And we didn't have other means of getting out public notice.
How would my district's pretty old. They all read the newspapers. They know which newspapers put in public notices, and they read those public notices. They would not, if you take away the print version of the public notice then and just put it online, then you have to know that you have to look for a public notice so you don't actually need the notice. So it's a fallacious argument. You need that kind of public space.
We brought a smart one in today.
I think there are a lot of
No, I love
seniors who rely on that printed product to keep up with legal notices. And I also think the bottom line is this is less transparency, and we need more transparency in government, not less transparency. It's not enough to just post it on a government site, which in many cases can be difficult to navigate. I've been on the government sites here, searching for agendas for meetings and bylaws, and they're very difficult to navigate. I mean, these are not sites
So much so that you almost have to start to ask if it's intentional.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. It's a
The
very fair question.
myfloridahouse.gov website is very easy to navigate. And you can find out the happenings of the Florida House of Representatives by going to myfloridahouse.gov.
However, do not use the find your rep button because it hasn't been updated since redistricting.
But there is a tab for representatives, and you click on that, and you can scroll down, and you can
If you know who yours is.
and you can meet Jennifer Webb.
It's true.
Oh, well.
So, as we wrap up this scintillating episode, tell us a couple of more things that are happening in Tallahassee that have created the buzz in the state capitol.
Yeah, there was a big concert last night in Tallahassee. I was not there as I was down here preparing for this wonderful podcast. But the Garnet and Gold game, the FSU spring game, was yesterday, and following that was an MC Hammer concert.
Are you serious?
Dang, please, Hammer, don't hurt him. I think Ernest was more interested in like what's happening legislatively, like if y'all will spill the tea on things that.
Well, can you review what happened with the arming teachers bill and the fact that we had March for Our Lives students come from all across the state to see that bill debated, and then it was not debated? What happened there?
That was in a conforming bill. And conforming bills are tied directly to the budget. So they're not policy bills. They're bills that have the policy for the budget in them. And it's kind of a new concept, maybe in the last 10 years or so, to put a lot of policy issues in conforming bills. Both the House and the Senate has done them traditionally. Last week, the Senate basically said we're not taking up your conforming bills, and so and they're going to have to be separate. We're not tying them. We're not doing them the same way that we have in previous years, and so that caused the Speaker to temporarily postpone those bills. And maybe try to do them a different way, and separate out some of the policy.
So the kids made the trip to Tallahassee for nothing.
Well, I wouldn't say for nothing,
No.
because there was a bunch of them there, and where my office is, I was able to overlook the courtyard and watch them do some of their different protests and whatnot. And so it wasn't, it wasn't a case where some kids showed up and we decided we weren't going to debate guns, because that wasn't the case at all. Last year we debated guns literally with students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School sitting in the gallery watching us.
What did you think, Jennifer?
I thought it was a hot button topic. I think that the Democrats put forward a ton of amendments to that bill that showed that we were well prepared and going to show up. The activists did play a role. The students played a role. The fact that the firefighters are there, the ones who respond when there's a tragedy, that played a role. And
But
to
we
what
had-
extent, who knows? I mean,
There were 40 amendments last year to the first Marjorie Stoneman Douglas school safety bill. And so I know for a fact it wasn't a case where Republicans got scared and said, "Oh, well, we're not going to debate these bills while these people are in town."
no, but it was are we going to take up the budget or are we going to spend all of our time on this bill?
But when the Senate that morning said we're not taking up your conforming bills, we could have taken them up, and it would have been a big waste of time when the Senate said, "Oh, by the way, we're not doing these bills anyways." And so, that'll be the kind of the intrigue in the last 4 weeks of session as we approach the budget conference, because you can't really do a budget conference without knowing where the money is going to go and what policies are going to be affected by the budget.
But the Senate decided that they weren't going to take up our conforming bills, and you can't say for certain what fed into their decision to not.
It
take
was
them up.
because of the policy of putting policies into conforming bills, and that was the reason. That
like the arming teachers.
Talk in English, because number one, I speak to the people who
conforming
care.
bills are different than policy bills because conforming bills are tied directly to the budget. And so when the House passed our budget the other day, there were some conforming bills that tied to policy in the budget. And so it wasn't just education. There was a healthcare conforming bill that got TP'd and another conforming bill that got TP'd. And so each side, when they do their budget, also passes a handful of conforming bills. And and the Senate, does the same thing. And so they just said, we're not doing the conforming bills like usual. We're going to have to take the policy out and do that separate, which you can do that, but it will cause, you can't do budget allocations without knowing what policies you're going to be allocating the money for.
But you could also stop policy that's bad policy by not taking up the conforming bill. If the Senate says, no, we're not actually we're going to separate this out, and then they don't move it forward.
In the education conforming bill, there was a lot more things to it than just the arming of teachers.
But now you have to separate it out.
There's some other provisions in there that'll continue to undermine public education. But we're running out of time.
Okay. I do think I do. Let me just say one thing, just from somebody who doesn't have an office in Tallahassee. The fact that so few
my
Republicans.
Office is your office.
Thank you. You are very generous to all your constituents with meeting with them. Regardless, I will give you that. However, I do think the overwhelming lack of Republicans meeting with those students is a message. But let me finish.
Did they contact those offices to try to meet with them? I know for a fact
they lined your halls for you to walk through. You just said you saw them and you didn't approach them. That's an active choice. You're a person with free will. You can reach out and say, "Tell me why you're here."
When somebody's in Tallahassee, I don't go and say, "Hey, what are you here for? Meet with me." I mean, with people that contact my office.
If somebody from WrestleMania organization, you knew they were across the hall, you would trot across so quickly and try to have a conversation. So that is an absolute not true statement.
But
I think there should have been some more initiative shown by members of your party. Do I think some of the Democrats use that for political posturing? For sure. It's a great photo op.
For not meeting with a group that didn't reach out to try to meet with them. I mean, that's just asinine. If you want to have a meeting with somebody, contact their office and say, can I see you?
All right. We do call this podcast Polititainment. The last few minutes, I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about our favorite music eras. I was driving in this morning, listening to the Romantics sing "That's What I Like About You." And I thought, I love the 80s, but I also love the 90s. But I also have a heart for the 70s. But I also hold the 60s in high esteem as a golden era. What's your favorite music era? Is it the 80s with Madonna and Prince and Bruce Springsteen and the new British invasion? Or is it the 90s with Nirvana and Pearl Jam?
Hootie and the
grunge
Blowfish.
Music.
I've met Hootie.
Tupac, Biggie.
Yes,
Vanilla
and
Ice.
The evolution of hip hop in the 90s.
So my era would certainly be the 90s as evidence.
I guess you're allowed to say the 2000s too, but
I'm all about the 90s.
I honestly believe it's all kind of been downhill since.
Yeah, that was my heyday.
I like punk from the 70s and 80s. I like swamp pop from the 50s because
What is swamp pop?
Shout out to Louisiana, and it's
Is that like Zydeco?
No, it's like Great Balls of Fire. It's like,
okay.
All of the guys that went down in that plane crash.
She's much cooler than we are.
Yeah,
the day the music died.
Yes,
The Big Bopper.
The Big Bopper, all
Richie
of it.
Valens and Buddy Holly.
Oh, Richie Ricardo Valenzuela. The first time I was ever allowed to miss mass was to watch the movie about his life.
Oh, yeah, La Bamba.
La Bamba, it's so true.
They've completely lost me.
I know. Chris and I are just like
Swamp Pop. What is it you guys don't know about Swamp? Jerry Lee Lewis.
I have to say that is far more interesting than compounding bills. But I would say I would have said 70s folk music because I am the child.
Give us some
Joni
examples.
Mitchell.
I love Joni Mitchell. I love Joan Baez. I love Peter, Paul, and Mary. This is, Paul Simon. These
James
are
Taylor.
I like James Taylor. He wasn't as big. This is the music of my childhood that my mother filled our house with. So, Bob Dylan. My 10-year-old son has seen Bob Dylan in concert. He's a staple in the tapestry, no pun intended, Carol, in my life. But I'm only going to say the 90s because I am outraged at some of the feminist media that has tried to dismantle the remarkable contributions that Alanis Morissette has brought forth with Jagged Little Pill that helped me through some very emotional breakups.
Yeah, that was one of my
It helped me see the future on the other side. And so I'm going with the 90s so I can stand strong with Alanis, but it would have been folk music from the 70s otherwise.
You should see Captain Marvel if you love the 90s. Okay. It's like that's the 90s music.
I
is
did
all
not
throughout
realize
Captain
Representative
Marvel.
Webb was this well versed.
She's hip, man. Would you have still wanted her to be here if you knew she was going to make us look so
Yeah, she's almost more hip than I am.
Oh, Christopher, you're a lot of things, but
I relaxed y'all because I said that I had never listened to a podcast.
Well,
her first podcast.
I think if I'm choosing, I'm probably choosing the 70s. It's a guilty pleasure, but I love Air Supply. I love Hall & Oates.
Oh, man.
They say, and we've talked about this before, Representative Webb, they say that your entire life is defined by whatever was the number one song on your 14th birthday. And of course, the number one song on my 14th birthday was Baby Come Back by Player, which means I've spent the rest of my life pleading for women to return to my life. And failing miserably, but
oh man,
that means you, Deneen.
Yes, I love so much of that music, but I think the 90s are underrated. I think the 90s had a lot of great music. They didn't have the super artists like you had in the 70s and 80s, but I have a lot of appreciation for a lot of that music. And I would include Alanis Morissette on that list, no doubt, Becca.
Oh, that album saved me. I went through my worst breakup of all time when that came out, and then I met the love of my life. So that really, it's really the arc of my angst and my glory.
Representative Webb, can you tell us what the number one song was on your 14th birthday?
Yeah, again, by Janet Jackson. And I do love me some Janet Jackson.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that song is about an ex-lover coming back into Janet's life and wrecking her world all over again. I'm not sure you want that to be the song that defines your entire life. But
stay away. No, it's a cautionary tale. So it's stay away from those exes. Don't let them back in. Learn from Janet. I don't have to recreate the wheel.
Mine is a Janet song too. It's "Miss You Much" by Janet Jackson.
I love that song.
Yeah, that's a great song.
That song preceded this song. See, she's missing him, got him back in. It was a wreck.
Yeah. I apparently it turns out Chris told me I'm older than you, so that would make sense. Yeah. So "Miss You Much." I'm gonna listen to it on the way home.
Good call, Chris.
Mine is "One Sweet Day." Mariah Carey, Boys to Men.
Oh God!
And I was all about
Arguably one of the
Boys to Men
saddest
back in the
songs
day.
ever.
Man, we're a sad state of affairs.
In middle school, I wrote a girl a song based on that "All for One" song. The
What
stroll. They're "All for One." They were like
How did it
Boys
go?
to Men before. As we stroll.
I know
along.
that song. Yes.
I don't know it.
So I rewrote it. and then we went to the movies.
What'd you
And
see?
The Big Green.
What?
And then we broke up because I didn't kiss her at the movies. And so
Why? Like she didn't think you were.
I was nervous back
But did she think you were not that into her, or like you broke up with her because you were nervous?
No, she broke up with me.
Yeah, the song you're talking about is "So in Love" by All for One.
Yeah.
It was a boy band.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very sugary.
But
if you're a
Boys
diabetic,
to
you
Men,
can't listen.
That
to
was
it.
back in the
End of
saltine
Road.
days.
Yeah.
The days
That
when-
was my heyday.
What was that one Boys to Men song that everybody played for graduation?
It's so hard to say goodbye.
Till
Ah.
yesterday.
And you pour some liquor out on the ground. I even remember the video.
Oh man!
That's what you do.
All right.
Well, listen, this has been fun. Representative Webb, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We loved having you.
It's been fun.
Great. I hope it's been a blast. Chris, Becca, love you as always. Look forward to talking to you guys again. And on our next episode, Dr. Mastracchio will be back with us to offer her very special blend of polititainment.
And don't forget, we're coming to Tallahassee at the end of the month. So if you want to be on the podcast, please contact Christopher's office to make an appointment.